Respectable news organizations like the New York Times and NPR like to stress their commitment to objective reporting, but they also associate their subscribers implicitly with the professional class social world and a cosmopolitan taste culture. So even though these outlets bend over backwards to show their professional neutrality, they are still predominantly viewed as liberal and by conservatives as far left. This points to the problem of assuming the partisan mapping of the US news environment is based solely on oppositional editorial biases. This conceptualization of media partisanship tends to overlook the indirect ways in which the marketing strategies of news outlets actually create political associations through these stylistic appeals. So my research strives to get us to rethink media partisanship, like what that actually is, and to question the extent to which its popular conceptualization is really about political ideology. To rely on a left-right ideological schema to define Fox News is to miss how the network manufactures republicanship as an identity style. So on principle, I'm not opposed, by the way, to partisan modes of journalism. Later in the talk, I'll discuss the Young Turks, a progressive news outlet that adopts a populist partisan style akin to Fox News. But the benefits of partisan media are contingent on whether the political media players from all parts of the ideological spectrum will accept and abide by a common set of rules for democratic action. It is one thing for a news organization to pick a side and insert itself in the political process. It is quite another to undercut the foundation of the democratic system itself by casting doubt on the integrity of elections. So news pundits, along with numerous high-profile Republican congressmen and women, repeated former President Donald Trump's erroneous claim that the 2020 election was rigged. And it was this claim that motivated the Stop the Steal march that devolved into a full-blown siege of the Capitol building on January 6th. So what transpired on that day was a rare event in American history that illustrates how easily spreading media falsehoods done only to appease your party's leader and his devoted followers might actually create a pretext for authoritarian power plays and political violence. In his article, Ethno-Nationalist Populism and the Mobilization of Collective Resentment, sociologist Bart Bonikowski argues that today's radical right in both the US and in Europe are mutually defined by their synthesis of three enduring political traditions: authoritarianism, nationalism, and populism. Now, of the three outlined here, authoritarian is obviously a unique threat to democracy. But to help provide some clarity on the question of what is and what is not democratic media, right? Fox News' promotion of the big lie about the 2020 election seems like a sensible baseline for pinpointing Fox's most illiberal qualities. So what is more debatable, however, is whether the other two components of Fox's discursive repertoire lie outside the boundaries of liberal democracy, this being ethno-nationalism and populism. So since its inception in 1996, Fox News has depicted itself as a counter-elite news network that offers news from, quote, a working class point of view. While maintaining core components of its original populist strategy, Fox has in recent years adopted a strikingly more ethno-nationalist programming agenda. This move reflects international trends as right-wing political movements across the globe have been animated by the issue of immigration. But Fox's ethno-nationalist turn also was driven by two domestic developments. First, Donald Trump's hyper-nationalist 2016 presidential campaign and Bannon's alt-right media movement that helped propel it. And then two, the ascendancy of Tucker Carlson to become the very face of Fox News and the most watched cable TV anchor in America. Now, Fox's programming themes have always historically fluctuated across this nationalist populist spectrum. The critical question is, what are the conditions that forge new populist nationalist combinations? So when we see fringe ideologies move from the margins into the mainstream, it is a sign that the existing political order may be in decline. Since the 1970s, the free market deregulatory regime of neoliberalism has enjoyed a cross-party consensus and around the globe. However, according to historian Gary Gerstle, this political order seems to be coming apart, which in turn has opened up space for Trump-style authoritarianism and Sanders-style socialism to flourish simultaneously. So responding to this moment of transition and ideological drift, Tucker Carlson concocted a programming formula that was, on one hand, further to the right on immigration and race, and on the other hand, further to the left on issues of war and economics. So what this yuppie presenting Carlson lacked in terms of a working class cultural style a la Bill O'Reilly, he has made up for with this potent mix of ethno-nationalism and anti-corporatism, a rhetorical ideological blend that hasn't been widely seen in American media since the 1930s, when right-wing fascist broadcasters like Father Coughlin were dominating the airwaves, right? So Tucker Carlson assumed O'Reilly's 8 p.m. primetime slot in 2016 and would eventually eclipse O'Reilly's previous untouchable ratings numbers, becoming the highest rated cable news host in history. And as his ratings were skyrocketing in 2018, Fox News' entire primetime lineup started to shift its editorial focus to the issue of immigration above all else, right? And noticing this trend, commentators such as MSNBC's Joy Ann Reid called Fox News' programming direction and specifically called out Fox News' programming direction and specifically blamed Carlson for turning the network into an openly white nationalist media organization. Carlson, of course, refuted the white nationalist label and countered that it was Reid and race-obsessed liberals on MSNBC that were the real racists. Kind of adding more of an empirical argument here, in 2021, the New York Times commissioned one of the largest empirical content studies on Tucker Carlson to date. The Times research team watched and read over 1,000 episodes of Tucker Carlson Tonight from 2016 to 2021. And the study was published in April 22. The content study component of the series definitively establishes how central the white replacement through immigration argument was in Carlson's programming. So this is the great replacement theory, right? White Americans will be replaced by Black and brown people coming in as immigrants. So in more than 400 episodes, states the authors, Carlson amplified the notion that Democratic politicians and others wanted to force demographic change through immigration as like a political strategy, as an intentional political strategy. But this Time study revealed another key trope of Tucker Carlson Tonight, which had been used twice as many times as the replacement theme. In over 800 episodes, Carlson had raised the specter of the menacing, quote, ruling class, a class that looked down on American workers. For all its merits, the Time study does not fully interrogate what Carlson meant by the ruling class, nor does it truly consider how the populist class-based themes of TCT's rhetorical system interfaces with and adds meaning to its white nationalist elements. This continues an analytical trend that has been typical of left analysis of conservative media, a propensity to conduct in-depth examinations of the most reactionary qualities of right-wing discourse while offering only thin descriptions of conservative media's populist undercurrents. So seeking to remedy this, my new project reveals the process of articulation by which Tucker Carlson Tonight first recodes left populist class critiques as being conservative, right? And then conversely, represents ethno-nationalist and white nationalist positions against immigrants and racial minorities as if they were some type of anti-elitist politics. So it's this kind of double move that he does. So on September 20th, so this is an episode that kind of reveals this articulation where he bridges these white nationalist themes to these populist kind of class themes. So on September 28, 2020, in an episode, he talks about the grotesquely unfair tax policy in America, and it exemplifies this type of rhetorical trick, this recoding where he takes left positions and claims they're conservative. So Carlson begins this monologue with a markedly leftist critique of income inequality, but then pivots and goes on to say this: lopsidedness is why a dozen left-wing tech oligarchs can decide what you're allowed to say and think. It's why young people seem so hopeless and nihilistic, why so many of them are not starting families. It's why some of them are breaking things in the streets. So here we see how Carlson folds the conservative movement's long-standing cultural lament about liberal media bias and political correctness into an equally long-standing leftist critique against corporate monopolies and media deregulation when he mentions the tech oligarchs. But in using an even slicker, slyer slant, In this episode, Carlson shoehorns criticism of the anti-racist Black Lives Matter movement at the end with his last comment about young people breaking things in the streets. This recalls an earlier segment in the same episode about a store owner who stood up to BLM protesters that allegedly firebombed his property. So in this way, we see how both the corporate overlords above and then the rabble-rousers from below are mutually tagged as left-wing. So Carlson reframed white nationalist grievances as economic grievances. This was his program's primary goal. It was to create this cross connotation between ethno-nationalism and populism. Consequently, from the audience's perspective, one type of politics seems to naturally evoke the other. But it is a grave mistake for the analysts themselves to fall for this right-wing strategy in their own analysis of conservative media by conflating populism with white nationalism from the start, an analytical tendency that is all too common in the writing on populism. So I stress that instead, that is conservative media's appeal to white working class identity, which is critical because it offers these nativist and authoritarian dimensions of their programming a sheen of moral legitimacy they would lack otherwise, right? So it's like a moral shield that blunts kind of critiques from the left and kind of for reflection from within. Now I want to pivot to my research on left-wing media, and it kind of will bring back this debate about what populism is, et cetera. And please, James, let me know how I'm doing on time. Don't feel free to interrupt me. So here's a provocative question. Which news organization has a stronger claim for being populist? Is it the right-wing corporate behemoth Fox News or the left-wing nonprofit Democracy Now? Now, of course, your answer all depends on how we define populist media. In his intro to the pioneering edited volume, Populism and the Mirror of Democracy, Francisco Paniza argues that there are two core ways to conceptualize populism. One is a mode of organization, and the other is a mode of representation. More recently, scholars like Ben Moffitt has theorized something similar when separating populism from strategy, from populism as style, right? So progressive media activists have long espoused what I would call an organizational conception of populism into their view of media populism. So this means they tend to evaluate the closeness or distance from the people, less in terms of how well the outlet's programming style resonates with the mass audience, and more in terms of how the outlet relies on bottom-up audience-based sources of funding and production. So over the course of the 20th century into the 21st, left activists in print, radio and television and online video have used terms like grassroots, independent, alternative, participatory media, network media, and horizontal media as catchwords for their vision of media populism. So each of these terms expresses a civic commitment to empowering audiences and a critique of the inaccessible quality of the mainstream media sphere. But they also belie an assumption about what matters most in the debate over media democracy. So for generations, left media activists have placed their emphasis on the conduit of communication, not the appeal of the content to audiences, not the appeal of the content, right? So carrying on this horizontalist legacy, Democracy Now! Proudly refuses all corporate sponsorship and is funded by donor contributions. With this principled organizational policy, combined with the network's anti-corporate, anti-imperialist editorial agenda, Democracy Now! Offers something close to an ideal type for left media categorization in the US. So the nonprofit's stated mission is to give, quote, citizens and grassroots activists a voice or the opportunity to debate establishment figures, a mission Democracy Now! Anchor Amy Goodman has spent her career pursuing. So for 3 decades, Goodman has covered protest movements and democratic uprisings across the globe, leading her to be beaten and arrested on several occasions. This courageous brand of investigative journalism positively associates Goodman and Democracy Now! With what Paniza has called populism in the streets. But even considering Fox's massive size, it also has depicted itself as an anti-establishment media force. My book demonstrates how the conservative network has effectively used a populist representational strategy to present the Republican Party as the natural political home of the white working class. So the difference we see between Fox News's vision of media populism and Democracy Now!'s reflects the larger disconnect between how the American right and how the American left understand populism. The former emphasizing aesthetic style and identity, the latter emphasizing political economy and grassroots activism. But Fox's underdog identity claim, it appears ridiculous when evaluating the network from a strictly institutional organizational perspective. It's a giant, massive corporation, right? But what if we place the shoe on the other foot and assess Democracy Now!'s claim to represent the working class within the stylistic criteria of Fox News's conservative populism, right? So as the small nonprofit, Democracy Now!'s budget is undoubtedly limited, but its no-frills aesthetic presentation is not merely a choice made out of necessity. It partly reflects Democracy Now!'s cultural politics, a politics that is tailored more to the subcultural taste preferences of educated professionals and leftist activists than to the mass taste of non-college educated workers. So in its 26-year history, Democracy Now! Anchors have maintained the professional voice of what's called the high modern journalism tradition. Now, this sober, emotionally detached anchoring style prevailed during the network era of the 1950s and 60s, and is still practiced by a handful of contemporary broadcasters, notably the other major publicly funded networks like NPR and PBS. So while Democracy Now!'s politics are far more radical than its center-left public media counterparts, the network shares the same infocentric conceptualization of news content that tends to attract a particular type of news consumer, one who, for the sake of self-education and good politics, is willing to endure a joyless set of news stories delivered without flair or emotion. Now, this brings me to the Young Turks, which I see it's this progressive online news outlet that was born on YouTube. And I think it presents something like a third lane between Democracy Now! and Fox News. So the Young Turks, or TYT for short, is one of the longest running daily news webcasts in history and is arguably the most successful news and politics channel on YouTube if you take into account both its longevity and its continued ability to garner one of the largest online audiences. So one thing that drew me to TYT is this comment that I've heard from liberal friends and colleagues, that while they share most of the policy positions that are promoted on TYT, they say that they detest the style of the network, that it reminds them of Fox News. So as a Fox News scholar, my ears perk up when I'm saying this very progressive news outlet reminds them of Fox News. And indeed, I see several stylistic parallels between TYT and Fox News. So let me play some clips of their promo so you get a sense of their stylistic orientation.
Out of fear, he was looking at Donald Trump's hair like it was cotton candy. Sorry, get him off. Get him off.
It's political game. They don't care about lives.
That's what we mean by the establishment press.
Yeah, no.
So again, you notice the similar editing techniques that you saw in the O'Reilly promo: percussive, fast editing, scenes of confrontation and emotion, hyper stylized graphics, etc. Very different from Democracy Now!, right, or PBS. So TYT embraces a loud, hyper stylized aesthetic and uses an emotionally expressive style that resembles both Fox News and its conservative YouTube competitors. But unlike Fox News, this self-identified progressive organization positions itself against the corporate media, the legacy media, something Fox News cannot claim as a multi-billion-dollar a year cable news company. So TYT advances the same economic critiques of American journalists that left media activists have voiced for generations. This left media philosophy conceptualizes advertisers and corporate sponsors as inherently corrupting forces because they believe their profit motive creates a tainted incentive structure that leads journalists to shy away from critiquing power, right? Yet because new left media projects like TYT were born online and built their audiences with the tools of for-profit social media platforms, they tend to have in practice a far less pure relationship with commercialism than the left media activists of the past. So this new research on left populist media on YouTube seeks to capture how the largest progressive online network attempts to manage a set of contradictions that had vexed left media producers for many years. So these include the tension between activism and professional journalism, between anti-commercial political values, but pragmatic commercial practices, and between populism as organization and populism as style. So in her analysis of right-wing channels on YouTube, Becca Lewis identifies 3 representational traits that characterizes a lot of right-wing influencers and social media, and Fox News. So one includes depicting themselves and their viewers as socio-political underdogs. The second is criticizing how the mainstream media is biased toward liberal perspectives and elite interests. And the third is expressing an authentic, emotionally honest media personality that breaks from the professionally styled and purportedly contrived news anchors of the established news organizations. So the combined use of these 3 representational components captures my definition of media populism. Now, TYT's programming exhibits all 3 of these populist formal qualities as well, but uses populism as a tool for advancing progressive interpretations of news events and to promote an anti-corporate tradition of media criticism, with Noam Chomsky's famous book, Manufacturing Consent, serving as a sort of like left YouTube Bible of media criticism. So this emphasis on political economy is what essentially distinguishes the digital left's vision of media populism from Fox News's style-driven, cultural identitarian-driven conceptualization. Now, allow me to play a clip of Cenk Uygur introducing Bernie Sanders at the presidential, one of his rallies in 2016. And this is important because while TYT has been around since 2005, the Sanders campaign was really a flashpoint, a jumping off point for the network.
Please welcome to the stage the host of the Young. Thank you, I'm host of Young Turks. The largest online news media organization because the corporate media dropped the ball. Something is apparently the rest of the media doesn't get it. You trust the establishment media. You think they treated Bernie Sanders fairly. Here's the part they don't understand.
So just a month prior to this rally, this grievance about how the mainstream media was covering Sanders motivated supporters to organize a, quote, Bernie blackout protest outside of CNN's Los Angeles studios, meaning they were upset that CNN and the mainstream media was systematically ignoring Sanders' speeches and events. And this alliance between the Sanders campaign and TYT heightened the digital operations journalistic profile and greatly expanded its audience. One report noted that from 2015 to 2016, TYT's numbers doubled its YouTube shares, tripled its Facebook likes, and grew its subscriber base by 75%. So the growth of TYT and the alternative left media sector's momentary coalescence around the Sanders outsider campaign did not, however, result in the political revolution that Sanders promised to fulfill. So frustrated by Bernie Sanders' defeat in 2016 Democratic primary, by Hillary Clinton, the favored candidate of the party establishment, Uygur and fellow progressive YouTuber Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk joined forces with some former Bernie Sanders staff members to launch the Justice Democrats. So similar how the Tea Party worked to drive the Republican Party further to the right, which it did quite successfully, this progressive PAC's founding mission was to push the Democratic Party further to the left, right, by primarying moderate Democrats, and specifically by recruiting working class women of color to do so, right? And AOC being the most famous one that was actually recruited by the Justice Democrats. Now, everyone talks about the Squad and AOC, their political story, but often the media story underneath their political story is forgotten, that they really were launched by like YouTube channels, right? Their funding, their initial coverage. So we can see TYT kind of bringing this up in their promos as well.
Simply talking, they're also running for office. And when they do run, They're going to make a difference. Joe Crowley is a congressman from New York. He's very powerful. Why? He raised a lot of money. But there's someone finally challenging him.
We need to have representation that advocates as fiercely for working class people as possible from this seat.
If candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even get a little bit of media attention outside of what the Young Turks does, they have an excellent chance of winning. She's going to win. She's going to win.
So the closeout, the relative success of TYT and the Justice Democrats indicate that there may be a significant portion of younger news consumers that are drawn in by populist media styles, but that do not have a fixed ideological identity. Due to historical contingencies, however, this audience reads populism as right-wing, but there's no reason why left populist media cannot reach them. Now, TYT offers surely one model, but not the only model for doing this. So when one views partisan media through the lens of style, the US journal political terrain looks far more open and fluid, right? And this is a useful way for me of thinking about coalition building, a way that seems more ideologically effective than readopting positions like we need to meet Republicans in the middle, we need to be more like centrist Democrats. That is the kind of advice one tends to get from Democratic strategists and liberal pundits on cable news. So I'll end there.